G'day everyone, it's Darren Murphy here from Core Integrity and welcome to another episode of Integrity Bites. This week we're going to talk about the report from the Australian Human Rights Commission that's gone out into relation to gymnastics. Now, if you haven't seen this or heard about it this week, you must be living under a rock. It's been big news, but it's been building for a while. It's not new information. Gymnastics Australia responded last year in 2020 to the Netflix scandal that came out in terms of Athlete A involving widespread abuse in America regarding gymnastics. It gave pause for concern to have a look in Australia, and similar issues were found, albeit very different to the American system. And it's given rise to this report from the Human Rights Commission that's come out this week. And look, as a father, and if you're a parent and you're out there and you've got kids competing in sport, it's a bit concerning. There's words that you never want to hear around systemic issues happening at sport of all levels, particularly in high performance. Things like child abuse, neglect, just general abuse, sexual assault, bullying, harassment, you name it, right? So a few key themes have come out around winning at all costs and a real disconnect between driving for that high performance outcome and the impact on individuals. Now, got to be said, this goes back a long time as well to early periods of time, the 80s and 90s and early 2000s. But suffice to say, pretty damning report. And it came out with, 5 key findings and 12 key recommendations. And for today, what I want to just talk about is a couple of things. Gymnastics has done a very good job in the last 12 months responding to this. It's been a tough year for them. They've engaged the Human Rights Commission and they were serious about looking into those issues. And that's why we've got this report now that runs 100 and something pages long. Importantly as well, you've got people like the Australian Institute of Sport that this week announced the Be Heard hotline, of which Core Integrity, my company, is a proud provider of. We've been working really hard with the AIS to help them get that program up and running, and very similar, wanting to hear about people that have had an issue in the past through those programs, wanting to say sorry and wanting to do something about it. So some of the key things that I want to call out in this week's episode is really that, in my opinion, whether it's sport, government or corporate, I think there's a coming tsunami of issues in relation to organisations not being ready to respond to this. So there's been a lot of focus in the last few years around trying to encourage reporting pathways and putting in frameworks and speak up channels. And obviously, in our business, we're really, all about that. The other part that we're trying to speak to our clients about is really trying to educate them on, it's one thing to get people to speak up. It's another to do something about it. And responding to those issues takes a lot of time, a lot of skill, and a lot of dollars. And I personally just don't think that, whether it's particularly sport at the grassroots or the junior levels, and in some of the lesser funded sports, they're just not ready for this. They're not ready for the kind of issues that are going to be reported, and they particularly don't have the internal capability and the internal capacity to respond. One of the key findings or recommendations out of this was that everything should be investigated involving bullying, harassment, child abuse, you name it, and we all agree with that. And it should be investigated outside of or external to the sport. And I think that's a really important thing. I think for far too long now, we've had sports grappling with trying to deal with issues themselves when they just don't have the capability. If you look at some large organizations like banks, big corporates, when they don't have the capability, what do? They go external and get experts to come in and do a fraud, a corruption, a forensic examination. They're having a big issue around financial advice or insurance issues or Royal Commission issues. They get experts to come in. We just don't see that when it comes to sport. Now, if that's a money-driven thing, then it needs to be addressed. But I think, in my personal opinion, what we're going to be looking at here across corporate Australia, in aged care, in sport, in government, is the tide has definitely turned. People want to speak up. They're starting to speak up. Organisations, they're just not ready for the tsunami that's coming. And I think that's where the next focus needs to be. It really needs to be on, how do we get the funding to have the right systems? How do we train people? And how do we mature our organisation to realise we need to go external to get help? We need trained investigators, trained counsellors, trained professionals to help us through these kind of complex issues. Anyway, that's it for me this week. I hope that was insightful. If you haven't read it, just read the high-level recommendations in the exec summary. Worth a read, particularly if you've got children in sport. And we'll catch you on the next episode.